how do you even describe High Tide? How does a 1-mana card have such an effect on a format? And how does it become a banned card? I started my Pauper journey around the time High Tide became unbanned, but I've never played against it. Someone does play it at my local game store, but I've just never been paired up against them, so I have no idea what this deck is. So I asked my friend to lend it to me, and then I started playing. And soon I understood. High Tide is a 1-mana instant. Makes it so all islands add an extra blue. Cast a High Tide, your islands now add 2 blue. Cast another High Tide, your islands now add 3 blue, and so on and so on. You get it. We have our islands making more mana. We play spells that untap our lands and draw cards. Then eventually our spells just generate more mana than they cost. Once we have enough mana, we play Stream of Thought and mill our opponent out. Most combos in Magic, you add 2 cards together, they create a loop, and then you win the game. High Tide does not create any loop. Once you start going off, there's a chance you fail. If your opponent really wants to win, they have to sit there and look at you play Magic alone, and then eventually just go, hey, are you done yet? And then I can go, no, I have to untap some more land. And I really want to show you how it went, because these games are goofy. It's a goofy deck. My plan is by turn 4 to have a hand that can win the game. So when I look at my starting hand, I have to ask myself, can this find the things I need? We have a lot of draw spells and a lot of search spells here, so I think this can go the distance. Though I would have preferred to see at least a High Tide or a Merchant Scroll. But I'll keep, I don't want to go down to 6. Not only am I going second, not only is this Guy who lent me the deck, but Guy is also playing High Tide. So my first ever game with this deck is against this deck, against a person who knows my list better than I do. Well, good luck to me. I have a preordained turn 1, and I can easily get my next land and improve my hand a little bit. Guy has a Brainstorm, and immediately my hope is that, he's Brainstorm locked, meaning he has to put 2 cards on top that he has to draw again. For his second turn, he uses a Lorien Reveal to shuffle what he put on top away and find another island to put into play, and then passes the turn back to me. Now, I have no High Tides in hand, and I need at least 2 to get started, so it's really important that I keep using all my mana to dig as deep as I can into my deck to find these High Tides. Luckily for me, Peer Through Depths lets me look at the top 5 cards of my deck and put 1 instant or sorcery into my hand, and hopefully I can find a High Tide here. It doesn't look like it, but there's another Peer Through Depths, which would let me look another 5 into my deck next turn. Also, it's an arcane spell, which will be important later. Now, we do both play a little bit of interaction, some counter spells, so it's about either finding stuff to counter the other's High Tide, or to find your own High Tide. Guy has a card that's much better at finding High Tide than the one I have. It's called Merchant Scroll. It's a 2-mana tutor, but it can only find instant sorceries into your hand. But Guy doesn't even find High Tide, he finds Modernless Mixture, which is a counter spell, so now I have to somehow get past that if I ever want to start playing High Tide. On my turn I play Pieces of the Puzzle, which looks at the top 5 cards of my library, and then I can put 2 instant or sorceries into my hand. I choose High Tide and Lorien Revealed because I want Deep Analysis in my graveyard since it has Flashback. At first I almost picked Deep Analysis, but then I remember I should put my Flashback spell into the graveyard, and that would have been a really bad play to put that into my hand where it costs more mana. However, since I've played a land every turn and a spell that replaces a spell, I have to discard because I got up to 8 cards by using that. So I discard my Lorien Reveal thinking I won't need it. My opponent keeps 2 mana open, doesn't play a land, and passes the turn. This is very good for me. This means I will most likely get to combo off first, but it also means that he's holding those 2 mana open for a counter spell. I'll try to play another Peer Through Depths, as I need to find a second High Tide, knowing the first one might be countered, and also I need 2 to go off. And I do find it, so now I have 2 High Tides. I'm not in a hurry, so I might as well just go find another island for next turn, and for that I can use this Lorien Reveal by island cycling it. When you island cycle it, you get to find an island and put into your hand. The next turn I have another island, and I hope Guy keeps being stuck at 2 mana. Not that that's fun, but because, I want to win. For Guy's turn, he passes the turn, and then it's my turn, because that's how turns work. Now I have a Snap in my hand, but returning creatures to your opponent's hand in this matchup is gonna be very bad. I'm gonna try and go for it. I play the first High Tide, then tap my second land for 2 mana, and try to cast my second High Tide using one of those mana, meaning I have a mana in my pool. We keep track of our mana down there at the card. My opponent taps an island and plays a Model Mixer to counter it. I point out it costs 2 mana, and he points out High Tide actually makes all islands give 2 mana, so I also enable my opponent. That's really good to know going forward and also really scary. Then I play Ideas Unbound, it draws 3 cards, and at the end of my turn I have to discard 3 cards. It's also an arcane spell. It's very important we remember it's an arcane spell. It becomes important later. I tap my island for 2, casting a Merchant Scroll, which I want to find a High Tide with, which I can cast for the 1 floating mana I have. My opponent says it's fine, lets it resolve, I find the High Tide, and I use the floating mana I have in my pool to cast that High Tide. There we go. My opponent uses Giga Drowse. And other than sounding like a Pokemon attack, it's a spell that taps target permanent and you can replicate it, which means you can basically tap any number of blue permanents as long as you have blue for each of those. I hope that made sense. That means I have to tap my land and respond, adding 2 blue to my mana pool, but I play Hidden Strings, which can untap 2 permanents, and I untap my 2 lands, which now produces 3 mana each, and I can use those 3 mana. Well, one of them to cast is Preordain. When you High Tide, there's a lot to keep track of. Your mana, how much your lands produce, what's in your graveyard. It gets very confusing fast, especially with interaction. And I haven't played this against someone before. Use the remaining floating mana to cast another Ideas Unbound, drawing 3 cards for just 2 mana. But now I only have 1 land left, and it adds another 3. I use 2 of those mana to untap 2 lands with another Hidden Strings. And now I have 2 lands that can make 3 each and a mana in my pool. I play another Ideas Unbound, drawing another 3 cards. I play a draw and then a Brainstorm to draw another 3 cards. And I've drawn something like 12 or 14 cards this turn, and I still have 4 mana to spare, but I need to start untapping more lands. I then spent 3 mana casting an Ideas Unbound, but this time I splice onto Arcane as Psychic Puppetry. Splice onto Arcane is a really weird keyword. It's a spell, and you can add its effect to other arcane spells if you pay the Splice onto Arcane cost, which in this case is 1. And since Ideas Unbound, I can splice this card's effect onto Ideas Unbound. And this card says untap a permanent. So now I can untap my lands whenever I play an arcane spell. Then I play a Brainstorm, and I don't even know how many cards I've drawn anymore. But I need to find an arcane spell so I can start untapping more lands. I also need more of those Psychic Puppetries, because I need to start untapping more lands than just the 1. I'm just constantly cycling through the same mana, drawing a few cards. I find this Peer Through Depths, which is an arcane spell, so I can cast it and splice onto Arcane. There was only one problem. I was out of mana. I bricked. I have to discard my whole hand because all those Ideas Unbound, each said I had to discard 3 cards at the end of the turn. So I have no cards left in hand and I pass the turn. And my opponent plays an Augur of Bolas, which finds an instant. Now I have to start over. I draw 1 card each turn, and hopefully I can find some way to win now. To be honest, when you brick the way I did, there's no way to win anymore. I should just technically concede at this point. My opponent now has all the turns he wants to find a way for him to go off. Perhaps I can find enough counterspells to also make him brick, but it's pretty unlikely. Also, I'm not gonna actually keep track of life. There's a 1-3 beating me, and I'm at 14 or something. You can see it attacking me, but it doesn't matter. These decks do not win through combat damage. It turns out the little interaction of just tapping some of my lands and countering a High Tide was enough to just make my deck fold in on itself. And now the problem becomes, can my opponent actually find a way to High Tide me so I lose the game? Or can I find enough interaction and interruption to stop him when he tries to eventually do it? That's my one plan. There is a sweet spot where he draws enough cards that I can cast a Stream of Thought for actual mana and mill him out. This world does exist. It's probably not the world we live in, but I have to go for it. I keep playing spells to improve the quality of my hands and drawing more cards, and I do have a lot more mana than my opponent, so it's not impossible. But let's check in with the game again. I think 6 turns have passed to something, and I'm being beaten down by a 1-3, while Guy still tries to improve his hand enough that he thinks it can somehow actually deliver a way to win. But it doesn't seem to be going very well. He still only has 3 lands in play, but now he does it. He plays his first high tide, and then he plays his second high tide. The second one I try to counter using a model mixture, and hopefully that's enough to make sure he can't actually high tide me into a win. Now, what I'm showing you is pretty heavily edited. All the thinking has been cut out, and a lot of the decision making too, so it's just the plays. But my turn when I tried to high tide took about 10 minutes, and now it's Guy's turn to do that to me. However, he has 2 of the psychic puppetries he can put onto one of his arcanes whenever he plays it. That way, untapping 2 lands, and both of those lands make 2 mana. So he can keep generating mana. What I failed to do in my 20-ish draws was get 2 of those psychic puppetries. Or more arcane spells for that matter. But Guy has spent more time sculpting his hand, finding the arcane spells and finding the psychic puppetries. That way he can splice them onto the arcane spells and keep generating mana. However, he still only found 2 high tides and 1 has been countered. And he only has 4 lands with 1 untapped right now. There's a chance he can brick as well. Sadly, while I said that, he resolved another high tide, and now his lands tap for 3 blue. So do mine, but I probably don't have any more interaction to throw at him. He plays a psychic puppetry, splicing psychic puppetry on it. This is a very desperate move. It lets him untap 2 lands, generating a bunch of mana, but it means he didn't really have anything. Then he plays Ideas Unbound to draw 3, untap a land. But now one of his psychic puppetries is actually in the graveyard, so he can't use it on the next couple of arcane spells he draws. Guy uses Snap on his own Augur of Bolas. That's really powerful because Snap not only returns it to his hand, it also untaps 2 of his lands. I could have really used him having a creature in play because I have a Snap too, and I really needed to untap some lands. Then he recasts the Augur of Bolas, which lets him find another instant or sorcery on top of the top 3 cards of his library and put that into his hand. But that's a really sweet play to snap your own creature because it generates 6 mana right now, as well as another card. Very powerful. The one problem right now is, if you look at the 2 high tides in the middle, that's where Guy notices down his floating mana, and it's only at 1. Doing all this drawing and all these spells, he hasn't actually saved up any mana for when he wants to stream a Thought Meat for the win. He just keeps playing spells and untapping lands, but he's not generating mana, he's just breaking even with it. And he's drawn as many cards as I had, with as many Ideas Unbound, meaning he will have to discard as many cards at the end of his turn. Now he plays Behold the Multiverse, it scries 2 and draws 2 cards, so he needs to find more high tides, more arcane spells, and it's really hard to commentary on this because I can barely keep up. We've both taken a 10-minute long turn, and now Guy plays a arcane spell that draws a card, splices onto arcane to untap a land, but he's still not generating any extra mana. Right now he has 2 lands that can tap for 3 each, and he uses that to cast more arcane spells that draw cards and untaps lands. However, it's still not getting him anywhere, and now he has to hardcast for 4 mana Behold the Multiverse, which allows him to look at the 2 top cards, scry them on the bottom if he wants, and then draw 2 cards. But he only has 1 land remaining now, which only makes 3 mana, so somehow those 3 mana are gonna have to win the game. Guy plays both the psychic puppetries, one spliced onto the other, untapping 2 lands. One then goes into graveyard, but that means 2 lands untap, and now he's generating mana. He then plays a Peer Through Depths, splicing the psychic puppetry on, untapping more lands, and now he's actually generating a whole lot of mana here. He finds another Peer Through Depths that he can also cast, and also put a psychic puppetry on. It's very bad that Guy had to use a psychic puppetry and get it into the graveyard, but it was the only way he could get enough mana to start casting spells again. If he had 2 Psychic Puppetries on each of these peer-through depths, he might have 1 by now, because he would be generating mana instead of going even every time he casts a spell. All of these spells cost 2, splice a spell onto them for the 3rd, and each land taps for 3. So he's tapping for 3, spending 3. Tapping for 3, spending 3. Now he casts a Brainstorm, so he actually manages to float 2 mana. And now you can see why perhaps this deck is not super fun to play against, because I've been sitting over there. To be fair, I did it to Guy too. He had to sit and watch me do the same thing. But you're just sitting there, waiting to see if your opponent has it or not. And it might seem like he doesn't, because now he's using the floating mana to play a Preordain, and he only has 1 untapped land. He needs to start untapping lands somehow. He uses this idea on Bound, and he has 1 Psychic Puppetry to it. It's the one up there. The fact that he puts it up there just means he adds it to every arcane spell he casts, so it's just for ease sake that he puts it there. He draws 3 cards, and among those cards, he finds another Psychic Puppetry. With the floating mana and the 3 from the 1 island in play, he can play a Peer-Through Depths with both the Psychic Puppetries spliced onto it, so you can untap 2 lands and go find a spell. Now, this was actually mana positive, because he used 4 mana and untapped 2 lands, which each makes 3 mana, meaning he technically netted 2 mana. And now he's starting to float more and more mana. This one spell netted him a total of 4 mana. Guy finds his next high tide, and this is when I have a response. I play Psychic Puppetry, and I splice onto it another Psychic Puppetry. Not only can it untap your own lands, it can actually also tap the opponent's. So in response to the high tide making the islands more powerful, I'm gonna try to tap his lands, and hopefully that sabotages him enough that he doesn't have the mana to cast whatever spells are in his hand and mills me out with a Stream of Thought. Now, my spells do resolve, which is impressive. Guy taps his lands in response. Each of them add 3 mana, so now he has a total of 8 mana in his mana pool. I don't know if this was enough, all I can do is hope. If I hadn't had those Psychic Puppetries in hand after my whole turn, maybe I would have conceded already. But that's Magic, baby! I had to sit here and watch these 20 minutes of Magic in hope that this plays good enough to make his combo fizzle. I only have 14 cards left in my library. That's the main problem now, because I drew so many cards on my turn that my library is almost empty, so he doesn't actually have to mill me for very much. So he starts using his Psychic Puppetries to just untap lands, splicing them onto each other. First he can untap 2 lands, then he can untap 1 land, and since they're so cheap, this nets him a bunch of mana. And he ends up having netted a total of 13 mana, I think actually 14 mana, by untapping his lands and casting those Psychic Puppetries. And this allows him to cast a Stream of Thought that's big enough that it mills my entire library. Stream of Thought is a 1 mana spell that mills for 4. You can replicate it for 4 mana, meaning you can make copies of it. Guy creates 4 copies, so 5 of them are targeting me, and he empties my library. Now I have a last thing I can do, because I have an upkeep before I draw and lose, and in my upkeep I play Psychic Puppetry. And then I go to my draw step where I have to draw for my empty library and I lose. That certainly was Magic the Gathering. I don't even know how to comment on this match. So many game reactions were taken, so little happened. First, I took a 10-minute turn, failed to get the win. Then my opponent took a 10-minute turn, also failed to get the win. But I got milled out anyway because I had drawn most of my own deck. This was a perfect example of why people find High Tide to be, let's say, less fun. I had to sit there for the entirety of my opponent's turn because I had 2 spells that could interact with him. If I had not had those 2 spells, I could have just scooped and been like, yeah, you have it, bye, and then we could have gone to the next game already. Don't get me wrong, I mean, we had a blast playing against each other, but now we truly had the High Tide experience. Now I want to have it again, but I want to win. And how do we do that? by sideboarding completely wrong. Now, what I take in isn't the real problem. Giga Draws is good to protect me trying to combo or to stop my opponent from doing it. Muddle and Envelop are also great. What I'm taking out is Preordain and Brainstorm, which is supposed to sculpt my hand to become perfect in the beginning. So now I really gotta bank on having a great starting hand. Luckily, I kinda do. The only thing that's a little scary is I only have one land. Lauren can get me a second one, but after that, we're gonna have to find one, and none of the cards in my hand can find lands. But we have the tide. We have everything we need to go nuts. This is my island. This is my Lauren reveal that I'm gonna find my other island with, because I don't have a Preordain or Brainstorm to sculpt my hand. We see here that my opponent does have a Preordain to sculpt his hand in the start of the turn, so I think he's off to a better start. The only question now is, can I find more islands? Because if I can find a third or fourth, I can probably win this by turn 3 or 4. For my second turn, I play the island I found, and then I have to play this Peer Through the Depths, because I need to find another High Tide or something, because then I can go off, maybe even with just 3 lands, and I don't think my opponent will be prepared for me going off this soon. I find this Psychic Puppetry, which is really good, because I have a lot of Arcanes in my hand, and then I can start untapping lands while playing them. If I get another island, I think I might just win this game on my turn, which would be great, because my opponent taps out to go find a High Tide. I don't draw a land, but I have another Peer Through Depths that I can use to find some sort of thing so I can set up for comboing off next turn with just 3 lands. The one problem here is I actually need to, whatever I'm looking for, I need to draw a land off the top of my deck. Here, however, I choose to take a Giga Draws, but because I'm behind on lands, I need to somehow interact with my opponent if he starts going off. Just like I don't expect him to expect me to go off on turn 2, I don't expect him to go off turn 3. So tapping out isn't that scary, because I don't assume he'll start playing the High Tides. He plays a Brainstorm, takes a while, puts 2 cards back on top, and then plays a Island Cycles a Lauren Reveal to get rid of those 2 cards and passes the turn back to me. I have a choice now. I can try to go off with just 2 islands, otherwise I'll just have to discard a card and pass. I don't feel like I can actually do it with this hand right now. There is a possibility, so I choose to discard these Pieces of the Puzzle because it's a 3-mana thing, and what I want to do is top deck an island and then try to go off. Though it might be too late because my opponent's all the way up to 4 mana, and he could try to go off now. Instead, he tries to find another instant from his library, and he does go and find a counter spell. So it's gonna be really hard to go off now because my opponent can counter one of my spells, and I still don't get another land, which is unfortunate, but also kind of my own fault for sideboarding out a Brainstorm and 3 Preordains. Those are supposed to be the things that find lands. I do have an Ideas Unbound in hand, like this one, that I could have cast to just draw 3, find a land, discard 3, but I would be going down a card, but I'll probably have been preferable to just discarding twice in a row. So I think I misplayed this and just shouldn't have gone for hoping to draw a land, and rather just make some worse plays. While playing an Ideas Unbound just to find a land seems really bad, you know, it's better than being stuck on 2 and discarding to hand size. My opponent keeps using a Brainstorm and stuff to make his hand even more better. Great wording. I'm starting to realize that my opponent has built up way too much an advantage having so much mana, and I still don't draw the land, so I try to go for it. I play the first High Tide, knowing it will most likely be countered. My opponent plays this Disrupt, which makes me pay 1, otherwise it's countered, and if I pay 1, I have no more mana to use High Tide with, so there's no point in paying the 1, and I just let the High Tide be countered. And then I pass the turn. At the end of my turn, my opponent plays a 1-mana spell that draws 1 card, but it's an arcane spell, so you can splice the Psychic Puppetry on it to tap or untap a land. He uses it this time to tap my land, making sure I can have no interaction on his next turn. So I try to cast this Muddle because my brain thinks High Tide is active and that it produces 2, but I have to take it back because, you know, I only had 1 mana. So my land is tapped, I can't interact, and it's my opponent's turn. My opponent has 6 mana available and a handful of cards. I do not like where this is going. For my opponent's turn, since I can't interact and he has everything he needs to go off, he starts the turn by playing a High Tide. Now he has 8 mana in total. He follows it up by showing me 2 Psychic Puppetries. This is simply to remind me that every arcane spell he plays can now untap 2 lands. Then he places an Ideas Unbound for 2 mana, spends another 2 to splice the 2 Psychic Puppetries on it to untap 2 lands, this way generating mana. The only good thing for me right now is my opponent seems to only have 1 High Tide, so the land still only produce 2, so he's only breaking even with the mana so far. My opponent then plays another arcane spell that digs into his library for more spells and splices both the Psychic Puppetries on, targeting his own lands to untap them, still doesn't find another High Tide, and then has to do it again. If I'm lucky, he uses all his arcane spells before he can find another High Tide. That way he'll run out of ways to untap his lands and generating more mana before the lands actually add a positive amount of mana. But that's very unlikely. So far he's stuck 13 cards deep and found no other High Tides and only 1 extra arcane. So he has to use this Beholder Multiverse to dig to, find some more arcane spells, but still no more High Tides. If he had had a second High Tide by now, all of those spells would have been generating mana. But let's take a look here at what actually is going to happen. I'm out of this game, so I'm just gonna show his hand now. See if you can keep up. I barely can. First was a Peer Through Depths, again with 2 Psychic Properties spliced onto it, untapping the lands again, finding more spells, and still looking for that second High Tide. But it doesn't come. He does have a Merchant Scroll now he could use to go find the High Tide, but all his spells are pretty heavy on mana or counter spells. So he uses the Stream of Thought, replicating it to mill himself. It also allows him to put cards from his graveyard back into his deck like all those arcane spells. But the real trick is to use the Disrupt to counter one of them unless you pay 1. And that if you don't pay it, you do get to draw a card. So that's a way he can draw a card for very cheap mana. Even though it did cost a lot to play that Stream of Thought. And he has to replicate it because he needs to put it back into the deck as he needs to win with it. The rest of his hand is too expensive to actually cast. The Lorien Reveals cost 5 mana. And while he could play them, he couldn't untap any lands afterwards. My opponent has chosen to play with an open hand for the camera, but he doesn't want to show me what he drew off the Disrupt, so we're gonna have to sit here and wait. It's another through, I forget what it's called, but it draws 1 card and you can splice onto it. So he draws another card, untaps some lands, and then plays the Merchant Scroll to go find another Peer Through Depths. Because it's an arcane spell that can be spliced onto, and he needs to find a Ideas Unbound, because he needs to both draw a High Tide and something that untaps land. However, we see here that the Peer Through Depths showed 4 islands and a Stream of Thought. And now he has an island, 2 Loriens, and a Stream of Thought. None of these can really win the game right now, so he just has to draw 3 and try to set up his hand again. He has a little mana floating, so maybe this Preordain can find the things he need. It does find the Ideas Unbound, but still no extra High Tide. So while he can play it and untap 2 lands, it won't actually help him much unless this goes into another Ideas Unbound and a High Tide. And it does go into a second High Tide, but even with this High Tide, it's gonna start being difficult to untap lands. This 1 card will allow him to draw once and then untap 2 lands, making sure he has enough mana to keep going for a little bit. But it's looking very tight because there's no card in his hand that allows him to untap mana right now. And he finds another High Tide. This is the problem with having to use your arcane spells to dig for the High Tides. Because now, even though he cast his Brainstorm, the mana he's using is finite. He needs to start really building up some mana. The Psychic Puppetries can't be used spliced onto each other to generate a lot of mana. And the 4th High Tide is found. Now it's really scary because if this turn ends, there are no more High Tides in the deck and my opponent can't actually win the game afterwards. He could try to play a very large stream of thought right now, but it would not be enough to mill me out. So he has to end his turn, and because of all the ideas Unbound he played, he needs to discard his entire hand except 2 counter spells. And now it's my turn. The one problem was my opponent took so long that we're in time now. So this is the first of 5 remaining turns. I have 5 turns to mill my opponent out. And if I do, it's a draw. I try to play a high tide, it's countered. We go to the second turn, it's my opponent's turn. He passes back to me, and now I need the perfect hand with 2 lands to win. I use a merchant scroll to go find a high tower, but it's counted. And now it's the something number turn, and my opponent digs, finding 1 Giga Draws, which could just tap my lands for my final turn. And then the game would be over, and he wins because he won the first one. And this one was a draw. I try to find a high tide and a land with this preordain. It's my only hope. I don't find it. I have to just play this stream of thought, milling my opponent for 4. He mills 4 cards. And then I have to end my turn, and he wins. I have to say, for my first experience with High Tide, this was absurd. No one actually won the game, we just kept bricking. Sadly, my opponent bricked a little less than me in the first game, and then in the second game, he used all his High Tides and then bricked. But because time had been called, I couldn't win the game either. There's 2 possible outcomes. One is I eventually actually get to go off, and the other one is my opponent drew more cards than me, so I could just let him draw out his whole library naturally. I guess this is why there's timers. What the lesson is here is I should bide my time with High Tide. I'm sorry. But that was the perfect example of why the deck is banned. It goes to time, it takes very long. You have to sit there and wait because your opponent can brick. That was a really fun experience. Luckily, I have 3 more games to actually try and play High Tide where I win. And I look forward to making those videos. I hope I'll see you Tide soon. In the meantime, bye Tide.